7 words. They hung in the air like a bullet suspended mid-flight, not yet touching the target, but impossible to call back. The room didn't exhale, didn't cough, didn't blink. Cameras that had been quietly humming seconds ago now stood frozen, as if afraid to miss the moment that would shatter the day's script. In Stephen Miran's eyes, something flickered, too subtle for most to notice. The smallest glitch, like a clock that had ticked perfectly for years and suddenly skipped a beat. Donald Trump sat beside him, leaning forward as if he could intercept the words before they hit the room. But it was already too late. 7 words, and the scaffolding of his carefully built plan collapsed like a house of cards under a breath. The microphones caught not just Jasmine Crockett's voice, but the silence that followed. Thick, heavy, as if coated in the dust of old archives someone had dared to open after decades. Miran tried to hold his posture, fingers locked together, shoulders even. But his eyes betrayed him. They slid sideways toward Trump, then out toward the gallery where a few senators were already trading glances. Trump didn't blink. His chin stayed high, radiating the practiced confidence of a man used to controlling the room. But in the shadow of his profile, the tight set of his jaw gave him away. He didn't like surprises. And those 7 words were nothing but. Somewhere in the back row, a reporter lowered his pen onto his notebook and simply froze. He knew he'd just heard something that would change the temperature of the hearing forever. Jasmine sat still, leaning forward slightly as if holding an invisible map marked with the spot where the truth was buried. She didn't rush. She knew those 7 words needed to sink deep into every mind in the room before she struck again. Silence held the chamber hostage. And in that silence, everyone realized this wasn't going to be an ordinary hearing. This would be an autopsy. And the patient on the table was power itself. The chamber didn't just look official, it looked staged. Every chair was lined up too straight, like someone had measured the angles with a ruler. The flags behind the committee table hung stiff, starched into obedience, saluting power instead of justice. The marble floor gleamed as if it had been polished not just for shine, but to erase whatever truth had been spilled here before. The air was cool, dry, the kind that makes your throat tighten. Somewhere near the far wall, the faint scent of lemon polish floated above the heavier smell of bodies packed too close. Staffers, reporters, onlookers leaning forward in their seats. It was the smell of a place where history might happen, or be buried. Lights glared from above, too bright to feel accidental. They flattened faces, washed out color, made every bead of sweat a public statement. The C-SPAN cameras perched like vultures, their red tally lights blinking steady, patient, waiting for the moment they'd swoop. Trump sat in the second row, arms crossed, posture like a fortress. He didn't need to speak. His presence filled the space like a warning. I'm still the ringmaster here. Miran at the witness table had the careful looseness of a man trying too hard to appear relaxed. Arms spread along the back of his chair, one ankle propped over a knee. It was the pose of someone auditioning for untouchable. A low hum buzzed from the air vents above, the only sound brave enough to move. Pages of briefing notes lay scattered in front of the panel, some stacked neatly, others marked with frantic red scribbles. A glass of water sweated on the chairman's desk, a single droplet sliding down like a second hand, counting the time left before the next rupture. Every eye in the room kept drifting toward Jasmine Crockett. She hadn't moved since she spoke. Her heels rested flat on the marble, her fingers just brushing the edge of a yellow legal pad. Not writing, not flipping pages, just waiting. The stillness around her wasn't emptiness, it was a fuse, and everyone knew it was burning. 5 minutes earlier, the room had been running on autopilot. The chairman's voice rolled through the formalities, titles, designations, the procedural drumbeat of another day in Washington. Pens scratched against paper. A few senators murmured to aides. The cameras scanned the panel like sleepy sentries. Then the moment came. President Donald J. Trump will now introduce his nominee for the Federal Reserve Board, Mr. Stephen Miran. Trump rose slowly, like a man certain no one would look away. His suit jacket flared just enough to reveal the American flag pin, perfectly centered. His voice carried that familiar mix of performance and authority, each syllable polished for the audience at home. He painted Miran as a genius, a patriot, a man with the kind of vision that will protect America's economy for generations. The words came easy, but each one was carefully placed, like bricks in a wall meant to be admired, not questioned. Miran stood when prompted. He adjusted his tie with the practiced precision of someone who'd done this before. His handshake with the chairman lasted just a second too long, the kind that says, "I belong here." His smile didn't quite reach his eyes, but it didn't need to. The optics were already doing the heavy lifting, clean-cut, confident, untouched by scandal, at least on the surface. In the gallery, a few lobbyists leaned forward, eyes narrow, reading between the lines. Reporters tapped notes into their phones, ready to fire off headlines about a smooth, uneventful nomination. The script was moving exactly as planned. No one knew yet that it was about to derail. No one except the woman sitting at the end of the table, the one who hadn't touched her notes, the one who didn't bother to mask the weight in her eyes. Jasmine Crockett was waiting for her turn, and when it came, she wasn't going to ask questions. She was going to light the match. The door at the back of the chamber didn't slam. It didn't need to. It opened with the slow precision of someone who knows the exact effect they're about to have. Heads turned before anyone saw her face. Heels struck marble, not hurried, not dragging, but measured, each click like a countdown no one had started, but everyone could hear. Jasmine Crockett didn't glide. She cut through the air. Her eyes scanned the room once, the panel, the nominee, the gallery, Trump in the second row, and then settled straight ahead as if nothing outside her line of sight mattered. No smiles, no nods, no polite waves to familiar faces. Just that stare, the kind that made grown men suddenly wonder what she already knew. Miran watched her approach with a faint, unreadable half-smile, the kind of expression that says, "I'm not rattled." But his fingers twitched once on the tabletop before he caught himself. Trump didn't move. His arms stayed crossed, but his gaze tracked her every step, like a hawk tracking something that might be dangerous, or already is. She reached her seat without a pause, set down a single folder, and sat. No shifting in the chair, no fidgeting. The air around her seemed to tighten, pulling focus away from every other corner of the room. The hum of side conversations faltered. The C-SPAN camera operator instinctively zoomed in. On the panel, one of the senior members cleared his throat, the sound too loud in the new quiet. A staffer shuffled papers, then stopped halfway, as if realizing the noise might be noticed. Even the ceiling lights seemed harsher now, spotlighting the space she occupied. Jasmine adjusted the microphone slowly, her fingertips brushing the metal, and glanced once at the chairman. She didn't speak, Not yet. She let the silence breathe, let the eyes settle on her, let the anticipation build until the air was tight enough to snap. It wasn't just an entrance. It was a takeover. She didn't rush. One hand rested lightly on the folder in front of her, the other curled around the base of the microphone. The metal was cool against her fingers, but the air in the room was warm. The kind of heat that comes not from temperature, but from too many eyes waiting for the same thing. The chairman gave her the floor with a nod. The sound of his gavel settling back on the desk seemed louder than it should have been. A page turned somewhere in the gallery, and then the sound vanished into the stillness. Jasmine glanced down, not to read, but to break the stare she'd been holding over the table. It was a brief moment, but it was enough for the anticipation to swell. Miran shifted slightly in his seat, the scrape of his shoe against the marble echoing faintly, as if the room had been wired to amplify the smallest cracks in composure. A drop of condensation slid down the side of the water glass near her elbow. She watched it travel to the base and pool. Slow, deliberate, inevitable. That was the feeling in the room now, inevitability. Something was about to land, and no one could stop it. Trump's eyes narrowed, his chin lifting a fraction, as if bracing. The C-SPAN camera pulled tighter on Jasmine's face. She didn't acknowledge it. Instead, she inhaled once, the sound barely audible, but strangely heavy, like the pull of air before a door slams. Then her gaze lifted, steady, unblinking. She let it pass over the committee, over Miran, and finally to Trump himself. Not to challenge, to warn. Her lips parted slightly, and for a moment it looked as if the words might come. But she let the pause stretch, seconds turning viscous, dragging the whole room into her timing. When she finally spoke, it would be with precision. But for now, the silence was hers, and it was already doing damage. Her lips moved, but the sound came slow. Each word dropped into the air like a stone into still water. Check. His account in the Caymans. Now. 7 syllables, each one its own blow. No explanation, no build-up, no softening. Just the clean precision of a blade sliding into the gap between armor plates. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. The words didn't need echo. They carved themselves directly into the room. The marble seemed colder, the air heavier. Stephen Moran's jaw tightened, but he didn't blink. His right hand, resting on the table, twitched once, the faintest tremor, before he clasped it with the other. Trump leaned back slightly, not retreating, but recalculating. His eyes narrowed, searching for a read on the rest of the room. And the rest of the room froze. A staffer stopped mid-note, pen hovering above paper. A senator in the second row turned slowly toward his colleague. Even the gavel on the chairman's desk seemed to hold its breath. The words were too specific to be rhetoric, too sharp to be speculation. They weren't a question. They were a command laced with the certainty of someone who already knew what they'd find. Somewhere, in the press gallery, a reporter's phone vibrated against a wooden bench. He didn't dare reach for it. Not now. Jasmine didn't lean back. She didn't smile. She simply let the silence swallow the sentence whole, giving it space to expand, to work its way into the minds of everyone present and everyone watching. The kind of silence that travels faster than sound. 7 words, and the nomination had shifted from routine ceremony to something far more dangerous. No one said it out loud yet, but everyone in that room understood. The fuse had been lit. It was subtle at first. the kind of shift only visible if you were looking for it. But in a room trained to read weakness, nothing went unnoticed. Miran's shoulders, once spread wide in that easy, untouchable posture, edged inward, just enough to betray that the armor wasn't solid anymore. His lips pressed together, whitening at the edges, a tell he probably didn't even know he had. The folder in front of him, untouched since he sat down, suddenly became the most interesting object in the room. He looked at it, but he wasn't reading. He was hiding. Trump's reaction was different, slower, heavier. His eyes stayed locked on Jasmine, but the stillness in his body shifted into something taut. A foot began tapping under the table. Slow, controlled, but rhythmic. His fingers drummed once against his bicep, then stopped as if he'd caught himself in the act. On the panel, two senators exchanged a look, one that asked, "Did she just say what I think she said?" A staffer in the corner made a quiet note on a yellow pad, underlining something twice. In the gallery, a lobbyist leaned forward, the creak of his chair impossibly loud in the hush. The C-SPAN cameras didn't miss any of it. One lens stayed trained on Miran's hands, another on Trump's face, another on Jasmine, the quiet epicenter of the quake. And Jasmine? She didn't gloat. She didn't lean back in satisfaction. She sat as she had before, steady, composed, eyes forward. If there was a crack forming in her opponents, she wasn't going to point at it. She was going to let it spread on its own, deeper and wider with every second of silence. Somewhere in the back, a reporter finally raised his phone and typed one line for the live blog. The nominee just flinched. Jasmine didn't rush. She knew that in hearings like this, silence wasn't absence. It was a weapon. The 7 words still hung in the air, but now she began the slow work of cutting them open for everyone to see what was inside. "Let's be clear," she said, her voice low, deliberate. "We're not talking about a slip of the tongue or an awkward phrase. We're talking about intent." Her eyes swept across the panel, then landed back on Miran. "You said the quiet part out loud, and the quiet part is the plan." Miran shifted in his seat, but she kept going. 7 words that tell us who gets heard and who gets ignored. 7 words that say, your voice matters, but only if it's convenient. She tapped the table once for emphasis, the sound echoing in the marble room. From the second row, Trump's jaw tightened. His hands clasped together so hard his knuckles blanched. She leaned forward, closing the space between her and the microphone. "We've all heard promises before," she said, "but promises don't mean anything if they're built on a foundation of selective listening. Those 7 words, they're not just dismissive, they're disqualifying." The gallery murmured, low and restless. One journalist scribbled furiously. Another whispered to a colleague, "She's not letting go." On the dais, a senator from the opposition side tried to interrupt. Jasmine didn't even look his way. "No, Senator," she said without breaking her gaze from Miran. "We're going to finish this thought before we pretend it's business as usual." Every camera in the room zoomed in at once. Miran's face, Trump's frown, Jasmine's unflinching stare. And somewhere beyond those walls, in living rooms and offices across the country, viewers began replaying the moment, realizing the real fight wasn't over what had been said, but over whether it would be allowed to matter. The room had been holding its breath for too long. You could feel it in the way people sat forward without realizing, in the twitch of a pen that had stopped taking notes, in the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. It was the kind of stillness that doesn't last. It cracks. And it cracked when Stephen Miran finally leaned into the microphone. His voice was steady at first, too steady, the tone of a man reading from a script written by someone else. "What I meant," he began, "was taken out of context. My words were—" Jasmine didn't let him finish. "Context?" she cut in, calm but lethal. "We've heard that word before. It's what people reach for when the truth is too clear to spin." Moran stiffened, his eyes narrowing just enough for the cameras to catch. Trump's gaze flicked to him, then back to Jasmine, as if calculating whether his nominee could survive the next few minutes. "You're asking us to believe," Jasmine continued, "that the 7 words we all heard somehow don't mean what they plainly mean. That they were, what? An accident? A joke? A private thought you didn't intend to share?" She paused, letting the possibilities hang like traps in the air. The gallery was silent now, no scribbling, no whispers, just the thud of a heart somewhere in the back row. Moran's composure wavered. His next words came faster, sharper. "I've served with integrity. That's not what's on trial here," Jasmine said, leaning in, her voice dropping a half step lower. "What's on trial is whether integrity survives contact with power." It was the line that shattered whatever thin shell of control had been holding. Moran's lips pressed into a tight line. Trump shifted in his seat. And in that moment, the air in the hearing room changed. No longer heavy with waiting, but charged with the inevitability of a confrontation neither side could walk away from without scars. The gavel struck once, sharp enough to jolt the air, but it didn't end the hearing. It only announced that the damage was done. The words had already left their marks, traveling faster than any official transcript could capture. Inside the chamber, Stephen Miran sat rigid, staring down at a folder he wasn't reading. The papers inside were just paper now. No protection, no shield. Beside him, his counsel whispered something low, urgent, but Moran's eyes stayed fixed forward, as if meeting Jasmine's gaze might turn him to stone. Trump didn't wait for the closing remarks. He stood, slow but deliberate, scanning the room with the kind of look meant to burn itself into memory. A warning, or maybe just an ending. Cameras followed him as he left, but not everyone turned to watch. Too many were still looking at Jasmine. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She gathered her papers with the calm of someone who knew the real fight was only just beginning. When she stood, it wasn't to bask in victory, but to leave the evidence exactly where it belonged. In the record, in the headlines, and in the public conscience. Outside, the city was already awake to the story. Reporters swarmed the steps, microphones thrust forward, questions overlapping. Do you believe the nomination will be withdrawn? Was this political theater or legitimate oversight? Are you prepared for the backlash? Jasmine answered none of them. She stepped past the cameras, coat swinging in the cold air, eyes fixed ahead. Somewhere down the block, a small crowd had gathered, not protesters, not supporters, just people. One woman held a handwritten sign, 7 words, "No job." And as the Capitol dome caught the last of the afternoon light, it felt less like an ending and more like the first aftershock of something bigger. The moment the story stopped belonging to the committee and started belonging to the country.